Mark DiRocco, Executive Director of the PA Association of School Administrators, take a minute and tell us about your membership.
Okay, thank you, Larry, and good morning. PASA is an organization that serves superintendents, assistant superintendents, IU executive directors and assistants, and central office cabinet level members, mostly administrators at the district level, although we do have administrators at the building level as well.
Now, can you give us an update on how schools are finishing out the academic year right now?
Well, I think most schools are trying to get things wrapped up to make sure they can pass all their students on to the next level. So whatever form of programming they had in place for distance learning, they're getting that finished up either last week or this week or into the early part of June. And then graduation ceremonies, of course, are going on. And that's being held in a variety of manners, mostly virtually for what we understand. But it's been a lot of work to try to put together those culminating events, especially for the seniors, so they can get them out the door and go on to whatever their chosen field or endeavor is.
Last week, the governor laid out some plans for school for this fall. So tell us about them.
Yeah, well, we're looking for the actual detailed guidance from the Department of Education. The governor talked generally about opening schools in the fall, and that's what everyone is looking forward to do. I think everybody wants to see schools open and hopefully open up with all the students being back in the buildings. But there are many, many considerations that have to be looked at and reviewed and dealt with over the summer. So just as school districts are finishing up the current year's programs and trying to provide the final episodes of learning for this year, they're already planning for opening up school next year. And there have been several documents out there that are helpful as of right now. And we're still looking forward to other guidelines coming from the Department of Education. The CDC considerations for school districts is probably the document that most districts have looked at right now. That's pretty detailed as to how to do social distancing in your buildings, things related to making sure the buildings are clean and staff members have the proper equipment, protective equipment, and so forth. So there's a lot of work to be done this summer in order to put a plan together or multiple plans together as to how schools are going to open in the fall.
And speaking of CDC guidelines, if we manage to put 6 feet between students, maybe there's a chance we'll run out of space. How are you going to manage that?
Well, that and many other of the CDC considerations are really the ultimate question. Some buildings will not be able to have 25 or 30 kids in a class and keep them 6 feet apart. So school buildings like that, administrators, school board members, and decision makers are going to look at other options. Can we do some kind of hybrid option where we don't have all the kids in the building at the same time so we can spread them out and make sure there are 6 feet between desks and tables and so forth? So those all have many implications, budget implications, as well as staffing implications. And so consequently, districts are going to have to work through all those scenarios to determine what they can and they can't do. And there really are 3 main scenarios that are out there. One is let's open up school with the idea that all the kids and all the staff are coming back in the building. And then how do we socially distance and do the proper protective protocols that are necessary? The second is we can't have everyone in the building. We can't do those use or put those considerations in place. So what kind of hybrid option can we set up where part of the students' week is going to be at home doing distance learning, part of the week is going to be at school and not have everybody in the building at the same time? And then the third option that no one really wants to talk about at this point, but is a reality, is what if we have to go back into shutdown again? We just saw what happened in South Korea. They sent all their kids back to school, and within a matter of a few days to a week, they had to close the schools again because they had a virus outbreak. So that option has to be available to school districts in the event we would have a resurgence of the virus in the fall, and whether the governor shuts down schools across the state or just a geographical area of schools across the state, we have to be ready for that.
So it sounds like at the very minimum, traditional attendance and dismissal times would be disrupted.
They very well could be. One of the considerations is, how do you put all the kids on a school bus to get them to school? How do you bring 5, 6, 700 kids into the building at the same time and socially distance properly? So you may have to have, staggered bus schedules. You may have to have staggered entry times and exit times of the building to make sure you don't have large congregations of kids where they're shoulder to shoulder, coming in and out of the building. Can you put 50 or 60 kids on a school bus? Maybe it's going to be one kid per seat. So you may have to run those buses 2 and 3 times during the day when you normally would have only run them once in the morning and once in the afternoon. Or do you put more buses on your schedule and have twice as many buses and twice as many drivers, and then there's costs associated with that. So all these things have to be considered over the summer, and I think it's going to be a great deal of work for administrators, board members, and school leaders to try to put all these pieces together and all these contingency plans in place in the event X, Y, or Z happens.
A lot of us have noticed who have visited retail stores lately the use of plexiglass shields between the cashier and the customer. Is that a practical consideration for school buses?
Well, that all depends on how they're going to be placed and where they're going to be placed at, whether or not they can do that and still meet, the safety guidelines for transportation. But I think all those things are going to be considered. I wouldn't be surprised that you see plexiglass shields in school offices when you first walk in, and other venues in a school building. I think all those things are up for consideration, and local districts are going to make determinations based on what they think will best help keep their kids and their staff members safe.
I was reading an article recently on Penn Live in which you were quoted, and also a superintendent from Middletown was quoted as well. And she talked about kids losing what she called collaboration and cooperative learning. What are those things? And furthermore, she went on to say the kids really enjoy that and seem to benefit from that.
Well, we know that collaborative or cooperative learning is a very powerful learning strategy and practice. And that is when you have 2 or more kids working together to solve a problem, create a project, learn some new information. And kids tend to learn well when they learn together and learn with each other. Now, with the social distancing considerations or guidelines in place, it's going to be much more difficult to do that. You certainly aren't going to put 2, 3, or 4 kids around a table or have them, sit in a circle on a rug on the floor and work through things. So, they'll have to do that either electronically or, talking to each other from 6 feet away, which is going to be, rather difficult at best to try to accomplish that. So we may have to go back to some of the old school, more lecture-based and note-taking learning, at least for a while, and try to do that collaboration through electronic means to the greatest extent possible. So these are all, temporary modifications that teachers and educators are going to have to make in order still to try to provide the best instruction possible for kids, but keeping these, health-related protocols in place.
Earlier, I asked you about the governor's plans for this fall, and you said at this point what you've learned is fairly general. Are you going to have a meeting with the Education Secretary, Pedro Rivera, at some stage? I understand there was talk of such a meeting.
Yeah, actually, we're expecting to have a meeting with the Secretary later this week with all the education agencies, and I'm sure they're going to be going over some of their new guidelines and suggestions for school districts as well. And we do anticipate that they will be sending out guidelines to all the school district leaders here in the near future, maybe as early as this week, to help districts start their planning process. And then we believe there's going to be a more detailed set of guidelines issued by the department in the middle of June, sometime around June 15th or so. And in addition to that, 8 of the education associations, including ours, we have been working jointly together to put together a series of suggestions and information for school leaders as well. We expect to have our document out to everybody by the middle of June, around June 12th or so.
At this stage, is it possible to say just how much control ultimately school districts will have over what they do in the fall?
Well, I don't have an ultimate answer on that, but what I can tell you is that for the most part, I do believe the governor and the Secretary of Education are going to allow districts to make most of the decisions at the local level as to how they're going to approach this, how they're going to open, the manner in which they're going to open, and what considerations they're going to put in place to keep their kids and their staff members safe. I think only if we get back into another resurgence of the virus will the governor step in at that point and make determinations about whether or not school is open.
Last question, Mark. How soon must the plan for this fall be finalized?
Well, that's a big question as well, and thank you for that. I think for most districts, they're going to want to have something out to their parents by the middle to the end of July, so parents know what to expect for the coming year. I doubt that they're going to want to wait much later than that because parents are going to need time to make adjustments in their child care situation, their personal home situation. So I'm sure most school leaders are going to want to articulate what their plans are early enough so parents have time to ask questions, clarify items, and make sure they're ready to go for whenever school opens.
Mark DiRocco, Executive Director of the PA Association of School Administrators, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
The eyes of the nation are on Pennsylvania as a key influencer to the 2020 election. PCN has over 25 years of trusted state government coverage. Our network is your platform to connect directly with Pennsylvania voters. Whether it's a presidential race, statewide campaign, or local cause, our viewers are ready to hear from you. Book your ad now. PCN, your access to Pennsylvania voters.
Senator Anthony Williams, Democrat from Philadelphia and Delaware County, you want to change the rules for lawmakers to disclose when they've been exposed to COVID-19. What is it you want to change?
Well, my hope is it's not only COVID-19. Anybody or any person who works in the General Assembly should, and that means not just the members, that means staff, should feel comfortable that they're not exposed to anything that would threaten their lives. In this case, it's a disease currently that scientifically has been validated to exist and unfortunately has extinguished the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in this country. The fact that we had members of the General Assembly who were exposed to it and didn't tell anyone else provided a risk to anyone who was around them. And that wasn't just members. It wasn't just Republican members. And it wasn't just anyone that was a part of that grouping. It was everyone who could potentially come in contact with something or someone that they've touched. And so my hope is that we will require some level of disclosure that protects the integrity of a patient, but also allows for the safety of those who work in the building. And then finally, also to require testing immediately for anyone who feels that they need to be tested.
So what is the entire legislature required to do under the current rules as far as disclosure is concerned?
Under the current law, and frankly, the current rules in the Senate are different than the current rules in the House. The current rules in the Senate do require some level of informing the body. It doesn't go as far as cleaning up what we've created, and that is the lack of testing. So I'm going to ask for that. It also doesn't necessarily guarantee that a member is going to be required to be engaged, and so we're going to take a step farther in that space. But the Senate rules do a lot to make sure that public safety is preserved in this space that we just happen to be in, which is a pandemic.
So it sounds like there may be some inconsistency in the rules between the four caucuses?
Well, within the two chambers at a minimum. The caucus the Senate operates under certain rules. The House operates under certain rules. And so the Senate rules, Republican and Democrat, do follow a certain protocol that does a lot in this space. We just need to tweak it a little bit more.
A lawmaker in the House tested positive for COVID-19, And how did the chamber handle that situation? That was Representative Andrew Lewis.
Yeah, that was disappointing, and it still remains disappointing. The comments which were made, the manner in which some of the members who were around him returned, their perspective that they don't need or should be required to wear a mask, the fact that they felt that they didn't need to tell anyone in a timely manner until they discovered that they were positive and had been quarantined, points to a weakness or defect in the process, because despite their personal perspectives and despite the fact that they are Republicans and think that this may be a partisan point to be made, this is about human beings who had to work in that chamber, and they're not all members. So it's disappointing, if not arrogant, in the manner that I think, frankly, it's been handled or being handled right now in the House of Representatives. How soon
did Andrew Lewis's colleagues know he had tested positive for COVID-19?
To date, that's a mystery, and that's the problem. Who he told first, why he told them, is not clear to most of us, and is relegated to a few folks apparently who are in his circle or in that leadership in the Republican caucus.
So how far did that news go? When he finally reported it, did he report it to his caucus and then the news stopped?
He reported it to his caucus or some member of his caucus. And at some point in time, those who suspected he may have been infected, it was a rumor, was then confirmed after prodding, apparently by House members on the Democratic side, to reveal what was truly going on. And then they told the House Democratic leadership what had truly occurred.
According to your plan, what kind of news merits being released? Possible exposure or an infection?
The language, and I don't have it in front of me right now, my apologies, is infection. I'm not certainly suggesting that because you're exposed that we know you're going to be contagious, because we don't. But if you are infected, suspect that you're infected, you should go get tested. And it may be COVID, it may be something else that comes up in the future. Whatever appropriately is designed to indicate that you can confirm that you can have a contaminant that puts someone else's life in danger, you should be required by the Senate rules and House rules to report it, and then have other members and staff know that it's occurred, and that you and we will provide testing to support to make sure that you're not positive in that same area.
And under your plan, all 4 political caucuses would be advised. And how soon does that news have to be put out to all 4 caucuses? Is there a deadline?
Immediately upon confirmation that the person has been infected.
Is there anyone else in that chain of notification besides the 4 caucuses? Who else would get the news?
No, it's not. So, to the extent that the public would know, that's not necessarily in our rules, because the question is, are the members and the people who operate in that workspace, are they protected, and do they have full knowledge, and can they feel comfortable and confident that they are operating in space that they will not be contaminated by a life-threatening disease? We don't find that necessary to be required to be a part of the news. Now, if a member chooses to do that, that's their business. But as long as they are not infecting other people recklessly within this workspace, that's what the Senate rules can do and should do. And that's the only space in which the rule change I'm proposing can do that.
Well, I understand under your plan, the General Services Department would be notified too. Is that right?
My apologies, you're right. I apologize.
Why include them, Senator?
Yeah, because they have a responsibility to make sure that the place is sanitized and clean. And they also, on frequent occasion, are there. Because after we leave session, they're cleaning off the desk. They cleaned off the desk of that member who was contaminated without knowledge of whether there was some trace of it being left behind. And so that's why they are included in the chain of information. So thank you for bringing that reminding me of that.
Now, beyond notifying all 4 caucuses that someone is involved with the COVID virus, you're also requesting testing for employees that might be involved in a COVID incident. You mentioned this briefly a few minutes ago.
Yeah, so we're clear that this particular disease does not discriminate nor restrict itself to a person or an individual. It can be anyone. And so anyone who's working in these two chambers should have the right, and we should have the responsibility as those who lead it to make sure that they know what their rights are. And that starts with one, coming into a place and being protected from the virus. So testing, as well as notification about infectious individuals, whoever they are that are in that workspace, we think that there's a responsibility to make sure everybody has that information.
How soon might the Senate address your proposed changes to the rules?
I would hope as soon as we return this coming week, we can have a conversation to address it. We have reached out to the Republican leadership, and they seem, on the Senate side, they seem open to the conversation and open to how we can modify the Senate rules in a way that accommodates everyone that's working in the chamber.
We only have a couple minutes left. I understand you had a COVID scare in your office back in March. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, I had a staff member who came to me who told me that they felt that they may be infected based upon symptoms that were presented to themselves that were similar to what had been reported in the newspaper. So as a consequence of that, I told that individual to remain at home and that we reported to the Democratic leadership. We did. And in turn, they reported it to their colleagues on the Republican side. That member of the staff was quarantined and tested immediately. They came back, I think, 5 or 6 days later, that they were negative. And we were able to confirm that and provide that information to all the leadership. So therefore, we didn't have to go any farther than that. But we were prepared to make sure every member and every staff person in that chamber was protected and informed about what had occurred.
We only have a minute left, Senator. Even though a partial budget is in place right now, how is that affecting traffic at the Capitol?
Traffic at the Capitol, I'm sorry?
Foot traffic at the Capitol, as far as having a lot of people in the Capitol at one time. Does that take some of the heat off, the fact that we have a budget in place, at least for several months?
Yeah. Normally it's teeming with people from rafter and balconies and the like. It's not that at all. Most of us are Zooming like we are today. Most of us are meeting remotely. Most of us are working remotely. Most have been lobbied through either teleconference or the Zooming process, and so it's dramatically different than it normally is.
All right, that's all the time we have. Senator Anthony Williams from Delaware County and Philadelphia, thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it.
During the uncertain times brought on by the coronavirus outbreak, PCN remains committed to the needs of Pennsylvania and its people. PCN provides free daily coronavirus updates from Governor Wolf and the Department of Health Secretary Dr. Levine, live, on air, and streaming on the app and online. These updates will be available to watch in their entirety on demand for free by downloading the PCN app or at pcntv.com. PCN, committed to keeping Pennsylvania informed.
I'm here with Stephen Caruso. He's a reporter with the Pennsylvania Capital Star. Now, Stephen, you wrote a story last Thursday about something that broke in the House. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, we're in the middle of this pandemic, and the House is 203 members, so this was probably bound to happen at some point, but a member was positive for COVID-19. The member, Representative Andrew Lewis, he represents the Harrisburg suburbs. He said he was tested on May 18th, and then he was found positive on May 20th. His last day in the House was May 14th. I lay out these dates because they're kind of really important, because what happened here is Lewis announces in a press release about a week after his positive test, and basically all hell breaks loose in the House, because before that release, rumors had already been circulating that a Republican member had tested positive because a reporter had approached House Democrats and said, hey, there's a positive test. Do you guys have any comment? Which was the first news Democrats had heard at all about this diagnosis. So they start getting very angry about this, and the House sort of just stops doing things for all of Wednesday afternoon. And in the middle of a budget cycle, nonetheless. And we eventually find out that it was Representative Lewis from his statement, because House Republicans were saying they couldn't release this information because of federal law on health privacy. This took on, all this took on an even bigger mind of its own as a news cycle, because Representative Brian Sims, a Philly Democrat, made an impassioned Facebook video where he called out Republicans for a cover-up, saying they put everyone at risk in the chamber. He kind of specifically portrayed it as a partisan matter of Republicans versus Democrats, and then also called on Speaker Mike Turzai to resign. And from there, it just continued to grow. So on Thursday, what we saw was this fight went onto the House floor, where Democrats started calling for the chamber to adjourn. They said that, until we know more, until there's been more testing, more contact tracing, how can we be sure that the virus hasn't spread further in the chamber? And this all ended with then the Speaker of the House, Mike Turzai, publicly saying that if he was tested, he would have revealed the results, and he would back a change to make sure that any positive results among members becomes public knowledge, or at least knowledge for the chamber immediately. So this was all the course of 2 days, and it was it basically brought a lot of action in the chamber to a standstill. They were able to move a few bits of budget legislation, but it became the story for middle of what was at that point a kind of productive week.
So how would you describe the response of the Democratic caucus versus the response of the Republican caucus to this news?
Yeah, so the difference has to be public or private. And because I would say that the number one thing to lead off is that as far as my reporting shows, no one outside of the top of the Republican caucus knew. And when I say that too, I need to be very clear that the Speaker Mike Turzai has caught a lot of flack, and he's been called to resign. Political ads have been run against him already. I have yet to see evidence that Turzai knew before many Democrats, or at least that he knew along with House Majority Leader Brian Cutler, who's the titular head and in fact runs the House HR department. And Turzai himself said he did not know. To be clear, this is not and I know that might seem odd to some listeners who are going to note that Turzai is a guy who has used a lot of power as speaker. The position is meant to be nonpartisan. The position is meant to be just head of the House. Turzai has often used that authority to assert himself in the chamber's operations. But the matter of this positive diagnosis was only known within the House Republican caucus, and Turzai's position is separate from that. So that kind of procedural stuff aside, why that's important is that my understanding is outside of House Majority Leader Cutler and the people who were affected, no Republicans knew as well, along with no Democrats. That's according to interviews with many lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. I would say that Democrats have framed this as a partisan cover-up, and then Republicans I've talked to have also said that look, we didn't know either. And the criticisms have been more muted, if outright not criticisms. I've had a few lawmakers say, look, I would have come forward too. But no one's been as full bore as calling it a cover up as Democrats have. And, the Democratic anger, though, I understand, because a lot of what it comes down to is how the facts are almost on both sides, because CDC guidelines tell workplaces to only sort of trace individuals who might have been in touch with a positive individual 48 hours before symptoms are noticeable. So we don't know the exact dates of Lewis's case, but he was last in the Capitol on May 14th. He looks like he was tested on May 18th after mild symptoms. So 48 hours from whenever he first developed symptoms might only be that last day in the Capitol. But then the CDC also says that sometimes COVID can, be in your system and spreadable for up to 2 weeks before you feel symptoms. Both of these are kind of options. The workplace guidances say 48 hours, but the CDC website, you can go there and I've linked to it. That also says up to 2 weeks. So I think the controversy comes down to Democrats are there are 2 weeks where this lawmaker Lewis could have been spreading the disease and we didn't know until right now. And I think that's sort of been the crux of their frustration. And we kind of saw that play out in the chamber last week.
And what were some of their biggest concerns that were expressed on the House floor? There was quite a lengthy debate about it.
Yeah, I think it's a lack of information being shared from the House Republican caucus. I mean, so I remember upon seeing this story, like I tried to think about like if put aside the partisan dynamics of the House, like the House is a workplace. 203 lawmakers work there, plus staff, plus janitors, plus security personnel. So the issue is, and what I think I tried to come out in our coverage is that the issue is almost a story of like, what happens in a workplace when the boss finds out there's a COVID case. So Republicans and Brian Cutler said this on the floor that private health information is private, and we cannot force someone to reveal that information unless they want. Like we only found out about Lewis's diagnosis after he put out a release, which was he was willing to do. He willingly did that. But Democrats are saying, but no, you need to tell us because we didn't have a chance to then self-quarantine. We didn't have a chance to test. We didn't have a chance to because even if there's a slim possibility, we should have had the ability to try and address that. Where this falls, this is a tough debate that I think a lot of bosses have been trying to figure out what to do in their workplace. I mean, this was an issue with state employers. I've covered caseworkers in state office buildings who were worried about COVID exposure there. And this sort of same issue of a flow of information came out. But, I think the most important thing that needs to be said is that the majority leader, Brian Cutler's office, was in communications to me, was trying to make it seem very clear that because of federal law, what they did was right. And what they did was certainly interpretation of holding the information tightly. But there are also interpretations of it can go much broader, where a boss could tell everyone in the workplace that you can't reveal identifying information, but there is no federal law that says that you cannot tell people who weren't even impacted potentially by disease that, hey, there was a COVID case in the office or a case of whatever. And that, that's what a labor attorney told me from Philadelphia. And he even said that he thought other workplaces might have been more forthcoming with that information about Lewis's diagnosis.
Now, where does this leave the Pennsylvania House of Representatives?
More angry than they were before. I mean, it's hard to say. I think that in general, I think because what's been happening for this whole crisis is there has been efforts to score political points as much as there's been to push public policy. And, we already saw political ads being run off the idea that Speaker Mike Turzai was hiding this diagnosis. So in that regard, maybe it's more of the same. It's more of the, it's a bit ratcheted up because lawmakers were potentially at risk of contracting disease themselves. But, we've been seeing this same debate play out over what does a safe workplace look like? Who should be working right now? Who is essential? Who is not? Who should be staying inside? Who should not be staying inside? So I think what makes this the most interesting is that now it's finally happening like in the chambers. They're no longer having debates on the House floor about dog groomers or manufacturing employees or couriers, what's their acceptable level of risk. They now are talking about themselves. And that's what I think almost made this most interesting. The House has been in session for, I think, the most of almost any legislative body in the country at this point. Like, they have been in session week after week after week. They're going to have a week off because tomorrow is the primary. So we'll see, or June 2nd. So, they have a week to, everyone can maybe take a deep breath, calm down. We'll see what happens on June 7th when they're back in.
Stephen Caruso, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Cass.